Today is February 26th, 2021. A few days ago, I made a video talking about the COVID-19 numbers for the United States, but in this video, I'll now talk about the worldwide COVID-19 numbers. I haven't made a video talking about these statistics in a while, so I think it's a good time to give an update on what's going on. As of now, we're at around 114 million worldwide cases of COVID-19, 113,985,943 to be exact, and we're at 2,529,337 deaths worldwide in total due to COVID-19. Now, that is around 2.5 million, and for the number of cases, we just hit 100 million cases around a month ago, so in the past month or so, we've had around 13 million cases or so. Out of the 113 million cases of COVID-19 that there have been in total across the planet, it's about to be 114 million. We're at 113.98 million. Out of those cases, 21, almost 22 million of those cases are still active, while the other 92 million cases have had an outcome, whether it be death or recovery. When I say recovery, I simply mean the patient did not die due to COVID-19. What often happens, or what sometimes happens, is that even though the patient doesn't die due to COVID-19, the patient still suffers from some serious effects, long-term effects due to COVID-19. For example, some people, even months after they got COVID-19 but then got better, they still reported having their sense of taste messed up, so it's different for everyone, but when I mean recovery, I simply mean did not die from COVID-19. So that's 89.5 million people have recovered from COVID-19, while 2.5 million have unfortunately passed away from COVID-19 across the planet. That's 92 million cases that have had an outcome. 21.91 million cases are currently active, which is almost 20% of the total number of COVID-19 cases are currently active, which is kind of high, but it makes sense when you consider the number of daily cases that there were in January and even February, for a good part of February even. So let's take a look at the case count per day and death count per day now, and then the total case count and total death count. So daily case count, it started at around, in the first wave back in the spring, the worldwide case count was close to 100,000 for a bit, 70 to 100,000 cases per day, but then in the summer, it got quite a bit worse. Summer for the Northern Hemisphere, I know Southern Hemisphere as the seasons flip, but when it was the summer for the Northern Hemisphere, that's when the daily case count rose pretty quickly from close to 100,000 per day to around 250,000 to 300,000 cases per day. So throughout the summer, you had that increase from 100K per day to 250,000 per day. But then it never got better. There was never a period where the case count really decreased by a substantial amount. It either increased or stayed level for the entirety of 2020. So in September, that's when it leveled out a bit at around 300,000 cases per day, but in October and November, that's when you saw a massive increase in the daily case count for the worldwide numbers, and by early December, you were seeing 700,000 to 750,000 new cases of COVID-19 every single day. The peak was in early January, the first 2 weeks of January. At one point, we had over 800,000 cases, 800,000 new cases of COVID-19, all in a single day. But after we hit our peak in early January, when we hit 800,000 cases of COVID-19 in a single day, we finally, for the first time throughout the entire pandemic, after it had been going on for almost a year, throughout January and February, so throughout the past 2 months, we finally started seeing the daily case count decrease by a significant amount. So in early January, it was around 700,000 cases per day, but then by late January, it was only around 500 to 600,000 cases per day, and then it continued to decrease because by early February, you only had 450,000 cases per day, and then by mid-February, you had around 400,000 cases per day, and that's kind of what it seems to be leveled out at this point, 400,000 cases per day, maybe a bit more than that, depending on the day. Let's now talk about the daily death count of COVID-19 throughout this entire pandemic. So at the beginning, in March and April, you had the first major wave of this pandemic in terms of deaths. You had the first major peak in terms of the daily death count. So throughout March and April, you saw the daily death count increase pretty significantly, and the first peak was in the middle of April when you had around 8,000 deaths per day at its peak, and then throughout May and June, you started to see that daily death count decrease to only half of that at around 4,000 deaths per day. And for a while, it actually leveled out at around 4 to 5,000 deaths per day. So from between May and October of 2020, throughout that entire time frame, the daily death count of COVID-19 across the planet usually was between 4 and 6,000, so it was mostly leveled out. But then, starting in late October, early November, you started to see a massive increase in the daily death count, similar to the increase in the daily case count that you saw that we just talked about. And that's why there was also an increase in the daily death count, because that massive increase in the case count led to a lot more deaths. But the thing is that there was a bit of a delay between an increase in the case count and increasing the death count per day. And it's because whenever someone gets COVID-19, they usually don't die from it right away. If they're going to die from the virus, it usually takes a couple weeks for the virus to actually kill them, because normally you go to the hospital and you try to get treated, and then a while after, that's when you pass away from the virus. Usually people don't just die a couple of days after getting the virus, but yeah, it was pretty sad to see all these deaths take place in the last couple of months of 2020, and even the first month of 2021 for that matter. So you saw the increase in the case count start in late October, but then the increase in the death count started in November. And at its absolute peak was near the end of January. See, for the case count, the peak was in early January, but because of that delay, the peak for the daily death count was closer to the end of January. And at the peak of this wave, which was the worst wave by far, you had around 15,000 deaths per day across the planet due to COVID-19. Twice as many daily deaths as what you saw back early on in the pandemic, March, April 2020, when the virus first started spreading pretty significantly. But ever since late January, the daily case count and the daily death count have really started to decrease significantly. See, by late January, we had around 15,000 deaths per day, but at this point in time, we're only at around 10,000 deaths per day, so it's decreased by a third, but that's still a pretty high number of deaths. The current daily death count is around what we were experiencing in late November, but hopefully this pattern will continue. I mean, the daily case count has been decreasing for weeks, it's just that there's a delay between decreases in the case count and decreases in the death count, so I would expect I would expect this trend to continue. I would expect the daily death count to continue to decrease across the planet. Now, let's talk about the total number of cases over time and total number of deaths over time. I'm going to give a brief summary of this. So, by the beginning of March, there were around 100,000 cases of COVID-19 across the planet in March 2020, but almost all of these cases were from China. But throughout March and April, the virus then started spreading to many other countries, and by early April, you had 1 million cases of COVID-19. I believe it was the first or second day of April when it was actually the very first day of April when we first broke 1 million cases of COVID-19. So, but just under 2 weeks after we broke the 1 million cases of COVID-19 threshold, just 2 weeks after that, approximately, that's when we hit 2 million cases of COVID 19 worldwide. In April 12th or April 13th, that's when we hit 2 million cases of COVID 19. So it only took 2 weeks for the case count to double across the planet from 1 million to 2 million. So, and then by late April, we hit 3 million cases of COVID 19, and then in early May, we hit 4 million cases of COVID 19. And then by the end of May, we had 6 million cases of COVID 19. And then we hit 10 million cases of COVID 19 in late June. And then we hit 15 million cases of COVID 19 in middle of July. And then by early August, we had 20 million cases. And then by the end of August, we had 25 million cases. And then we hit 30 million in September, 40 million in the middle of October, 50 million, half of 100 million. We hit that in the first week of November, right around when the 2020 presidential election was going on. That's also right around when the United States hit 10 million cases of COVID 19. Throughout the majority of this pandemic, the United States has made up around a fifth of the total worldwide cases. Generally, the United States made up 20% of the worldwide cases. Like in early November, when the United States had 10 million cases, the world had 50 million cases, so the United States made up a fifth of that. And then we hit 60 million cases in the second half of November, 70 million cases in early December, and then 80 million cases in late December, the last week of December, right before the year ended. And then we hit 90 million cases in the first half of January 2021. That's when it got really bad. That's when you saw like 800,000 cases per day. That's when we hit 90 million cases of COVID-19. And right around a month ago, we hit 100 million cases of COVID-19 across the planet. And then between the end of January 2021 and now, which is the end of February 2021, we've had around 13 million new cases. So we hit 110 million cases around a week or so ago. I think it was February 16th when we hit 110 million cases, so around 10 days ago, actually, a little more than a week ago. But now we're at 113 million cases, and it looks like the daily case count will continue to decrease. It has been decreasing pretty consistently for the past month or so. Hopefully, it'll continue to decrease. Now, I talk about all of these things just as statistics, but keep in mind, 100 million people, that's 100 million distinct people. At this point, we're at 113 million. Like, the way we talk about it, we never really have a good idea of how many people that truly is. How many people have had their lives changed because they got this virus. Not only that, but we had 2.5 million people die from this virus. We say it just as if it's a statistic, but I would like you to really think about how many deaths that is across the planet. That's absolutely devastating number of deaths that we've had due to this virus just in the past year. This virus has not even been a pandemic for a year yet. On March 11th, that's when the World Health Organization declared this a pandemic, so it's been a little under a year, and it has taken the lives of 2.5 million people across the planet. That's not even a number that is easy to comprehend, but that's the number of people across the planet that this virus has taken. Now, in terms of the total death count, we hit 100,000 in the middle of April, then we hit 300,000 in the middle of May, and then we hit 500,000 in late June, and then we got to a million deaths due to COVID-19 in the middle of September 2020, and then by the start of November 2020, we were already at 1.25 million deaths due to COVID-19. And in early December, that's when we reached 1.5 million deaths. And then around January 13th or 14th, 2021, that's when we reached 2 million deaths due to COVID-19 across the planet. And I actually think I made a video right around that time talking about that depressing threshold that we crossed 2 million deaths. And ever since then, we've had 500,000 more deaths across the planet just in the past month and a half approximately, because we're already at 2.5 million deaths now as of February 26th, 2021. So ever since November of 2020 up until now, the number of deaths per day that has taken place has been absolutely devastating. It's disturbing to think about, but the good news is that it looks like the daily death count has really started to decrease pretty significantly recently. I'm only hoping that that trend will keep up in the upcoming weeks, because right now it's still pretty bad. It's as bad now as it was in late November, like I said. Last thing I'll talk about now is the countries with the most cases, most deaths, and also the highest percentage of their population that have been infected. So, the country with the most cases is the United States. That's what it's been for almost the entirety of this pandemic. The United States has usually made up around a fifth of the total worldwide cases. At this point, though, the United States makes up even more than a fifth of the total worldwide cases. There are around 110 million cases of COVID-19. A fifth of that is 22 million. The United States is at 29 million. So we're doing even worse than before compared to the rest of the world. The third wave, to say the least, hit the United States badly throughout December and January. December 2020, January 2021. India is in second place, but doesn't even have half the number of cases that the US does, even though it has around 3 times as many people, or actually 4 times as many people. The United States has around 330 million. India has close to 1.3 billion, so India has many more people, but still has fewer cases of COVID-19. It could be they don't have as much access to testing, but besides that, I'm not really sure what other reasons there are for that massive difference in terms of the percentage of their population that have been infected. Brazil is in third place for the most number of cases with 10.5 million cases, and every other country after Brazil has less than 5 million cases. So Brazil, India, and United States make up a large percentage of the total worldwide COVID-19 cases. Now for deaths, the United States is also unfortunately leading in that by a pretty substantial margin. We're at 523,000 deaths on as of February 26th. India doesn't even have half of that. India has 156,000 deaths due to COVID-19 in total, but Brazil is actually in second place for that with 252,000 deaths, which is still less than half of 523,000. And then Mexico, I guess, is in third place with 184,000 deaths. overall, the COVID 19 pandemic has hit the United States pretty badly, more than almost any other country.